This is TWiT.
The going dark problem that we touch on from time to time is not going away. And I don't think it shows any signs of going away. A headline in Forbes caught my eye. The headline read, and just I'll say first that it's not true. It read, U.S. Well, okay, no. Technically, it is true.
It's not because it's a rumor.
Yes. U.S. may outlaw messaging encryption used by WhatsApp, iMessage, and others.
See, I've been watching this story with interest too, and I haven't talked about it on any of our shows because it's just a leak. It's a rumor.
Yeah. Right.
But the minute, and I wouldn't put it past President Trump, the minute that they propose this, we got to raise holy hell.
So, okay. So
but they haven't yet.
So Forbes saying that, normally pretty upstanding, although it wasn't an author who I know. There's a really good...
not upstanding. That's the problem, is half their content's good, half their content's not.
Well, so this is U.S. may outlaw. Well,
Yeah,
okay,
may,
yeah. It may.
I might too.
So anyway, so I thought, what? How did I miss that? And so, of course, if the headline was more speculative than anything. Anyway, I tracked down the source material for this article, which was a story in Politico, which actually had some useful reporting. The story was titled "Trump Officials Weigh Encryption Crackdown." And even that is a little inflammatory, but of course, clickbait. So I've trimmed down what Politico wrote, removing a lot of the superfluous stuff and fluff, like of them explaining what encryption, end-to-end encryption is, that our audience, of course, all knows. But there were some interesting bits left which are useful for getting a sense of the environment. So paraphrasing heavily, senior Trump administration officials met last Wednesday to discuss whether to seek legislation prohibiting tech companies from using forms of encryption that law enforcement can't break. The encryption challenge, which the government, as we know, calls going dark, was the focus of a National Security Council, that's NSC, meeting Wednesday morning, last Wednesday, that included the number 2 officials, the so-called deputies, from several key agencies, according to 3 people who were familiar with the matter. So Politico says senior officials debated whether to ask Congress to effectively outlaw end-to-end encryption. One of the people interviewed said the 2 paths were to either put out a statement, a general position on encryption, and say that they would continue to work on a solution, or, second path, to ask Congress for legislation. The unreported meeting of the NSC's so-called Deputies Committee did not produce a decision. A decision to press for legislation would have, this is Politico writing, far-reaching consequences for the privacy and security, effectively forcing companies such as Apple and Google to water down the security features on their smartphones and other devices. A ban on end-to-end encryption, which is not really what anyone is proposing, would make it easier for law enforcement and intelligence agents to access suspects' data. Yeah, but such a measure would also make it easier for hackers and spies to steal Americans' private data by creating loopholes in encryption, which is more correct, that are designed for the government but accessible to anyone who reverse engineers them. Okay, maybe. Watering down encryption would also endanger people who rely on scrambled communications to hide from stalkers and abusive ex-spouses, blah, blah, blah. Right. So, this is just so Politico says Politico was unable to determine what participating agency leaders said during the meeting, but there is a well-known fault line on encryption within the executive branch. The DOJ and the FBI argue that catching criminals and terrorists should be the top priority, even if watering down encryption creates hacking risks. The Commerce and State Departments disagree, pointing to the economic, security, and diplomatic consequences of mandating encryption backdoors. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, is internally divided. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the CISA we've talked about, knows the importance of encrypting sensitive data, especially in critical infrastructure operations. But ICE and the Secret Service regularly run into encryption roadblocks during their investigations. An NSC spokesperson declined to comment on the meeting. So the high-level NSC discussion highlights how policymakers have continued grappling with encryption even as it has receded from the headlines. And there's a lobbyist familiar with the discussions was quoted, "There is a significant administration-wide effort underway on what to do about the going dark issue." And then finally they said tech companies such as Apple and Google, okay, we all know about this, San Bernardino, we know about that. The transition between the Obama and Trump administrations saw a handoff of sorts between two high-profile advocates of the need to access encrypted data. After President Donald Trump fired Comey, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein succeeded him as the government's top going dark warrior. Rosenstein, who dealt with the issue as a U.S. attorney, warned vaguely that cooperation with Silicon Valley was unlikely to work, implying that legislation might be needed. But now Rosenstein is gone, and experts generally agree that Congress is unlikely to pass a bill requiring warrant-compatible encryption. And that's the first time I've seen that term anywhere. And that's interesting because that's sort of what we've been talking about. Warrant-compatible encryption, meaning you still have encryption, but it's some means for under warrant allowing decryption, which the reason it's interesting, it's an interesting term, is that we've talked about the Constitution's protections against unwarranted search and seizure that we have in the U.S., but under a warrant, that you're able to, if you're able to get a judge to issue a warrant, then law enforcement is able to do what they, with probable cause, to do what they feel they need to. And as we know, Senators Richard Burr and Dianne Feinstein floated a draft measure back in 2016 after the San Bernardino issue, but it was met with an intense backlash, which quickly killed any prospects for it going forward. So the presumption is that this was sort of a sentiment gauging meeting, which might be preliminary to more public and open talks. And in any event, as I followed up other links from this story, I discovered the Lawfare blog with its back and forth discussions about a proposal by the UK's GCHQ, which I referred to at the top of the show.
The Ghost Protocol.
Yes, the Ghost Protocol. We don't have time to talk about it this week, but I'm preliminarily titling next week's podcast The Ghost Protocol to discuss it at some length, because it's the first instance of a serious government-sourced quasi-compromise beyond where we are now, which is sort of an all or nothing. And there's been immediate pushback from the tech community. I mean, basically, the tech community is going to push back against what they perceive as weakening of encryption, but there's no way around the fact that warrant-compatible encryption is a weakening of encryption. And so I mean, you know, it's difficult to see how we move past this, but I think we're going to have to. I mean, either we decide that we need to get shims installed into the devices before the encryption, as we've talked about, so that we're not weakening the encryption. But the problem is, what law enforcement wants is everything to be recorded and then to be able to go back into previously recorded encrypted conversations and retrospectively decrypt them. And so the idea being, well, we don't, we don't know ahead of time what the conversations were for example, the case of the San Bernardino attack. They wanted to get the guy's smartphone and then look at what conversations had been had prior to the attack. So the fact that those are tantalizingly available is part of the problem. So I don't know. I mean, this is going to create a tension, and I think this is one of the most interesting things happening today in the security and privacy arena, is this problem, this tension between the fact that we now have math that cannot be cracked and governments are not happy with it.